Okay. Hello, everyone. Uh, Let me fix that. Okay. When inner storylines match external experiences. That's the title of tonight's episode. And I want to take the attention of the listener to the importance of not only the stories in their attention, but the stories that the being acts as. I was listening to Jim Carrey in one of these YouTube videos, and he was saying where he noticed that who he was, regardless of all these characters he's played in movies, he noticed who he was a character but not an intentional character, as if the world is building us into something before we can even truly be aware of it. I find there's something significant here. I have often established in these talks that we have to be aware of the language threshold. We have to be conscious and considerate of the linguistic simulation. I've even suggested how Carl Jung has said, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So what that means is in 2019, the human being finds himself having a sensitivity to the subjective world that gives value to the objective. There is an approach where you can see thoughts are there to serve reality. There is an approach where you can see reality is there to serve thought. Some people feel that they are walking in worlds behind their eyes that, in some sense, the external reality can never acknowledge. You see, this is the unique thing about human evolution that we did not consider, that there was a subjective evolution at some point. So now, this human creature, the Homo sapien, is endlessly, let us say, based on the various environments it's going through, based on the various ways it's being a person to himself, constantly moving through the hidden momentum of a story. When I say inner storylines, you see, every opinion you have on yourself is a storyline, is an image in some sort of space and time. So when one realizes they're playing the game of being a character in space and time, but what's in space and time changes, therefore we have to consider we are the not just an idea behind our eyes, we are a living idea. We are an idea that is prone to change. We are an idea that uses data from the objective realm and the subjective realm. It uses ideology accordingly. And guys, if my voice is not loud enough, please let me know, but I think it should be okay now. So here's the thing. Carl Jung spoke about synchronicity. Terence McKenna spoke about the human being, just like how we have this kind of uh, esoteric theosophical idea of like a mind coming into a body. Terence McKenna had this idea that we are bodies entering minds. And it's as if the mind of the unknown has many appearances, countless in accordance to the effort and intention of how you enter through it. I feel what life is asking people is not for them to try harder. It's for people to care enough for the inner realm in which the outer realm. Here's the thing, most children I find are raised through a sort of dependence and submissive modality of perception. The human, the creature is tested. You can say every day waves of data, things are being thrown at the conscious being from the unconscious. Now, how it interprets these things will suggest kind of what storyline it's moving through, right? For example, when I give these talks, I go into For example, kind of like the Mr. Within archetype I've built, a sort of certain voice in the sky, So, for example, I step into that kind of inner room of the activation of ideology. This is a good way of talking about it, actually, that ideology gets activated into meaning. That means there are endless symbols in this world. If you want to make an object into the ultimate, if you want to see divinity in an object, guess what? You can see it in any object. You know, for a bald man, a comb may be, divine. And for a man whose head is filled with hair, life still commands the forest to go on. What I mean by that is that at some point, man will have not just a relationship with the idea of himself, with the idea of the world, but with the elemental application of how these ideas become active in an energetic space. It's like you can't throw, you can't kick a soccer ball intensely at a window and not expect the window to break. Therefore, it's more about human actions being purely inspired by external conditions, but as internal conditions have developed, inner environments have taken place behind the eyes of the creature. Now there is a responsibility for the inner environment to also influence the outer. Now more than ever, the species needs to awaken from its animalistic slumber of billions of years. This idea of coincidence, synchronicity, all these people in the New Age community suddenly finding a new appreciation for numbers. I've had moments where my inner reality's voice was louder than the outer reality's voice. In those moments, intuition was closer to the attention than that which was more of an external structure. You see, intuition is the rhythmic dynamic intelligence of the being. In moments of movement, the world animates differently compared to moments of stillness. We've had many poets and mystics throughout the years in history simply sing hymns about the unknown. And I realized the human being, once it got obsessed over knowledge and it discovered the edge of that knowledge, it became obsessed with the unknown. Once man had something to worship in his hand and that thing was slapped out of his hand, as idol worship was slapped out of his hand, he in some sense had to stare at the unknown again. And what came from the unknown was language worship. Language began becoming an influence of our minds. That means really the human mind's ability is in its communication. That means you could be, for example, the greatest chef on the planet, but if you do not cook something, nobody will ever see. So that's the challenge, that the civilization is not making it easy for the human being to trust itself. And a human being that doesn't trust itself will suddenly run towards, kind of desperately towards, an ideological embrace. I have done this myself. There have been moments where I have been proven wrong. Literally, I have entered moments of life where it's as if the moment, the lords of karma of the moment were like, no, your egoic construct is unauthorized. And so I've had many moments where in some sense, my attention has entered doors which my ideology could not. And so this relationship is one of being aware of body, because really what we're doing, human beings are doing, is they're either looking at their physical body and thinking that's it, or they're looking at their physical body and wondering if the unknown factor has different implication. I'm one of those people suggesting that after Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead and man killed him, there was something else in the execution line. What does that mean? That means after the personality of the unknown was rebelled against, the unknown would be next. And this is why right now is the most crucial point. It's the sacrifice of the natural creative vision in regards to its unnatural environment. That is, it's as if the mind of man opened to the world as a machine first. What I mean by that is people started to see how things relate to other things. That's really studying a machine, is it not? Imagine you had never heard of the word machine and you just saw something that had many different parts moving at the same time. You'd eventually wonder, you know? And so what it is you can say all systems start from a simple origin. There needs to be one moment in the causality of a system where it sets up shop. I remember my grandfather was a factory owner in Iran, and I remember one day asking him, like, what's your approach to business? And he was a religious man. I mean, he still is, but I asked him, and I'm like, what was your approach to your business life? And he told me, just open your shop and people will come. And I realize it's this whole thing that the world is demanding something of the citizen, and the citizen either supplies it or not. And if it doesn't, don't worry. There will be so many children that will come after you that will attempt it. You know, the thing is, we are awakening to the mistakes. I find every child of every generation should have noticed that there are mistakes that were made prior that we could not even fathom. It's the thing about the unfathomable problem that's influencing the background of the whole thing. There's many of those. If you want to change the past, you need a box of tissues first, because there would be too many tears of too many moments not being acknowledged properly. That is the tragedy, the chaos of history. How greatness lived but was not seen. Do you know? It's tragic, and it's simply because we're still we're a young species playing with the ideas of ourselves like toys. We have not even, it's like, if there was right now, I wouldn't be giving these talks if there were people in groups all everywhere just constantly joining to wonder about what is beyond the evolution of language. That's a huge problem. It's the apocalypse that the educational system has not acknowledged, but will come to it soon. It will suddenly realize the world is hovering in emptiness, and that would be chaotic. That would be a total calling towards the reestablishing of the major archetypes that lead civilization. You see, it's not, I don't see it's that people. Carl Jung kind of opened up a new dimension of thought in accordance to what the human mind is or what the psyche is. For most people, eventually it would go on this thin line of either being the cosmos that's here only, or man who's here in an inanimate cosmos. That means the world has to be lifeless for you to feel you have your life. It is very few people who can live in a way on this planet as if they have never been here, as if it doesn't matter how stardust changes its formation. There is a reunion. It's something where the lonely soul will find. There's certain teachings, by the way, they can only come through loneliness. Certain secrets of your eyes cannot be opened by anyone else. Literally, you have to reverse engineer. You have to open the hood of your belief system and re-examine the major ways you put the world into motion. So what I mean by that is that think of it this way. A person goes into a moment of success and failure. Let's say they succeed. Now, that person who went into that moment of success and failure due to the dualistic dimension of language, before that person succeeded or failed, there were two potential parallel realities. That means life was only based on what it objectively seemed like. But as there was objective success, the person noticed they had, in some sense, avoided the failure. You see? Sometimes you have to win some inner battles before you can win some external battles. I feel that the species is not caring for its mind because it doesn't know how to acknowledge it. I feel we are starving for unknown meaning behind the programs that we have lived in so long. You know, there is two modes of thinking about the planet Earth, about civilization's advancement. Either it advances with a consideration of the individual's inner reality or it doesn't. And I will be honest, ladies and gentlemen, in 2019, the civilization doesn't have the slightest clue about people's inner realities. Rationality has made us blind to the emotions that arose because rationality is only the implementation. What I mean by that is, like, before something becomes rational, guess what? Everything was irrational before language, you know? So rationality is an imposition, kind of like how the building blocks of the moment occurred. For me, I have found contentment with my inner life. I have found I was reintroduced to the unknown of my inner dimensions. But the outer dimensions then slowed for a bit. You can't live like a mind, and expect like the full progress of a embodied being. There is always a cost to any battle you fight. That's something that should be known. Some listeners may wonder why I have chosen such an animated wallpaper. To be honest, it's because the person's as if like shocked by something they've read on their phone. That's why. And it is the introduction of data that evokes the responsibility of a new self. Let me tell you how life emotionally I've experienced it, at least. It's been a state of being in a sort of moment, as if like when I wake up in the day, I'm in a certain room, in a certain atmosphere. You can say the mind has opened in a certain state. Now, if I have had dreams, I require to be still a bit to just process that a little. But it's one of those things where I just become sensitive to how the day is awakening in my sight. And trust me, it's kind of like Gandhi. Gandhi would say that every time he would sleep, he would, in some sense, the self of that day would die and he would awaken as a new self. So Gandhi didn't experience one kind of Gandhi his whole life. He experienced endless days of Gandhis. So what I mean by that is that think about how much that relationship is different. For a body, we say, all right, memories, character in a story went through that experience at that time, and you have a sort of chronological relationship with space and time. A sort of sequence of events that has become you now. You know, but when it comes to the mind, it becomes more like noticing, like trying to pick it's like a kind of like a 24 frames per second kind of situation, where it's like when you really, every state of mind can stand on its own, but at the same time is dependent on the momentum of where it's being pulled to or taken to. I want to share a story that I haven't shared for a while. It's the story of Hafez. Hafez of Shirazi, this poet who I believe was alive, I don't know, 700, 900 years ago, this ancient Persian poet. He was a Sufi, he was a dervish, so kind his eyes were open to the sort of spiritual dimensions of Islam, you can say. I find the same relationship Gnosticism has with Christianity is a similar kind of relationship that Sufism has with Islam. So, anyways, this guy is a Sufi dervish, Hafiz. He's a poet, by the way, some next level poet. His poetry is read every year by Persian people. So, anyways, what happens is Hafiz has a disciple, and it's so beautiful how this part's written. It says, suddenly the eyes of Hafiz's heart saw something. It's as if your eyes can see only what's in the room, but the eyes of your heart can see, uh, kind of can watch space and time from many moments. And so what happens is in this story, Hafiz suddenly gets this vision that there's this slave that's back in the day, right, 700 years ago. So there's this slave that's kind of ran out from this household, and the slaves managed to run away from this hell and kind of come to this cave, and he's sitting in that cave, and in that cave, the slave is just praying to God, God help me, God help me, God help me, as if like he's being chased by the cruelties of the past. And so the slave is there just praying, and suddenly a voice comes to Hafiz after his heart's vision, and suddenly the voice says, "You have to go attend to this guy." So it's like as if like Hafiz's phone signal was high. And so, upon receiving a sort of vision, Hafiz looks at his disciple and says something very unique, as if this is what needs to happen. And he looks at his disciple and he says, "This is your task. You have to go get this guy, but you are not allowed to say a single thing to this guy." So just think about what's happening here. Hafiz is telling his disciple, this guy, to go and save the slave, but he's not allowed to say a single word to the slave. And the disciple, of course, trusts Hafiz's eyes, and in some sense, he goes on to the task. You know, young Mozart goes on the task. The disciple goes and listens to Hafiz's kind of instructions and directions, address directions, GPS directions. And what happens is the disciple suddenly comes and finds the cave. And in the cave sees there's a man kind of like so super scared and praying. And so he goes and he suddenly gets up, and in his mind, he's so happy. He's like, we're going to save this guy. Like, oh my God, like this is a great moment. And right when he goes there, he's suddenly the voice of Hafiz comes into his ears. And he realizes he can't say anything. And he just sees the look of horror on that person in the cave. He sees the slave is like, holy shit, they're taking me back. No, the slave feels hell is grabbing him again. And it's in this moment where the disciple is shocked. He's like, Hafiz, what are you doing to me? You know? And he goes and he eventually ties the hand of that guy, and to the back of his horse, and he takes him, and the whole time this disciple is just riding this horse, and the slave is shouting, God help me, God help me. The disciple has tears in his eyes, right? Just tears, endless tears, but he's silent. He can't say a single thing. And he has tears because he's like, oh my God, this guy doesn't realize how close he is to his freedom, but he is shouting, praying at the heavens to help him. And suddenly the disciple realizes what the lesson of that moment was. It is the endurance of the divine. It is that trust I'm like talking about in all these talks. And eventually they get to the house, and they release the guy. Hafiz comes and greets the guy. He's like, hey man, don't freak out. We came and saved you. It's like Batman, Robin kind of getting props. And Yeah, the slave is no longer a slave. He is literally, life showed him those experiences. It's like he paid his karmic debt, and that's it. After your karma's paid, nothing can touch you. It's a very incredible story. It was really inspiring for me. And there's other stories similar to this, right, from different traditions. For example, there's a story, I'll share this too. It's one of the wonderful Sri Ramana Maharshi, a man who reminded the world that silence is divine. One day, Sri Ramana Maharshi's disciples, now we went from ancient Persia, now we're going to India, the mountain of Arunachala, where there's a temple for Sri Ramana Maharshi in India. Sri Ramana Maharshi, one day his disciples from all around the world and from wherever, they come up to him and they see one of the disciples, the poor guy from the beginning, is being told to do labor, is being told to do endless work. So this guy's just from the beginning, every day he's doing all the labor work of the ashram, and he's silent, and it's like there's no meditation teachings given to him, there's no satsangs this guy attends, he's just doing work. And so again, the disciples go to Ramana Maharshi and they're like, yo, why isn't this guy kind of like trying to get enlightened, Ramana Maharshi Ramana Maharshi says Ramana Maharshi says because he's paying his karmic debt, his karmic credits, kind of like, he doesn't need philosophy. He doesn't need the inner worlds to open. He doesn't need a touch from the divine. He just needs to finish his participation in matter as thought. The world we live in, it's incredibly and fascinating to see how weird it is. So it's important because I find every person think about it this way, as if you have an arsenal of weapons. You have like various different ways that you can move thought as a creature in accordance to that has been inspired. Like based on what you've been exposed to right now, the way you hear me even saying these stories, I can even notice, like, sometimes when I talk, I see patterns linking with patterns of other memories. It's we are such a creature beyond thought that any pattern observed either implies a new pattern, or implies something beyond the pattern, or implies the pattern was never there because there was something more. You see, the unknown will break knowledge in an instant. That day will come. But it's important because for the first time, it's like, without the mind, how could there have ever been a counterculture? How could there ever have been progress without an ability to acknowledge, kind of like this philosophical idea that if a tree falls in, like, a forest where no one's there, did the tree fall? It's like, can unknown phenomena be processed? It's like, can man know what's going on behind the event, beyond the event horizon of a black hole? Strangely, if the more one goes towards let's take it like this, let's divide all knowledge, everything in life, between what is known and what is unknown. Obviously, we see the unknown is bigger, so the whole civilization is defined by its knowledge based on what it knows. So what it means is that the mind is in a position where it can interpret unknown patterns of movement and bring them into a sort of, kind of bring them back to the what the tribe knows. I find that's the value of the internet, is it not? Like, what are people doing on YouTube all day? They're just trying to see people's inner realities, because it's like YouTube doesn't just allow you to see like what it's like living in the Netherlands. You know, you can also see what it's like living behind someone's eyes as they tell you a story of their life. So we are fascinated by the subtler, more deeper appreciation of the mind. You know, and this whole thing, some part of me feels it's not a big issue, but some part of me feels it should comment on it, and it's this whole thing about political correctness. And political correctness is a symptom of a civilization becoming sensitive to the language that defines it, and then still animalistically reacting to it. It's like, why was there nobody in for example, all these ruthless evil dictators we see in history, why was there no one in their family who came and said, hey man, relax? You know, it's because of what we felt we were not given and what we feel we can take. Honestly, that is, to be honest, material inspirations are limited. You're either here to be something. In other words, you're here to do something with evolve the experience of an archetype and the human not all people on this planet are here to do physical work. It's not material. Sometimes it has to do with steering attention, you know. Let me find this quote. It's from Buckminster Fuller about here. Let me read it. Buckminster Fuller, I consider him one of the greatest designers on this planet. And I also feel he had access to the future collective mind that we will all be probably in 500 years or something. So Buckminster Fuller says, we're not going to be able to operate our spaceship, Earth, successfully nor for much longer unless we see it as a whole spaceship and our fate is common. It has to be everybody or nobody. You know why he says this? Is because why not use a tool that is there? Let me tell you, the world has cruel dimensions to it and it has kind dimensions to it. Our civilization will realize we started from cruel dimensions first. We were vicious animals, like the caveman, as much as we clap for them for figuring out fire, but it was like a lot of fucked up shit was happening there too. You know, and the only reason we can even call it fucked up is because now we have more sophisticated reference points, as if like you couldn't do something when you were 10, but now you're 20 and you can do something, and then you'll be 30 and you can do so many other things, and then when you reach a certain point where eventually you'll see it's as if you start off as a body but end off as a mind that lived a life, you know. So that sensitivity to mind, you know, again, like Buckminster Fuller says, integrity is the essence of everything successful. That integrity is natural. That means there have been times where I have done irrational actions in the moment, but by just trusting like the emotional intelligence of the moment, and it ended up being the great better than the rational potential possibility. It's because we are putting being human first before being defined first. Our humanity is an experiential, emotional thing. But society is just acknowledging us as a sentence on a piece of paper, and that is not enough. Do you know how many? Let me tell you what happens. I think it's after maybe the 10th failure in the lifetime, there will come a sense of disgust. You know, some failures are heavy. I remember speaking to someone who, an uncle of mine who had gone through an intense experience. And he said he found himself in a moment where, as if there was a weapon pointed behind his head, but the bullet wasn't shot from the weapon, it was shot from another weapon to scare people. And anyways, long story short, he found himself in a fucked up situation where he thought he was going to die, and his last moment of kind of looking at things was like, this is a failed system. And I don't know, out of all the stories he's told me, that one stuck. That one stuck around in my mind because it was such a deep doubt. Do you know it was? Trust me, I. It's like Rene Descartes had some hidden tears that the world doesn't know about. You cannot go on doubting a Rene Descartes' approach to a sort of truth was a methodical doubt. This dude was doubting everything. And do you know what happens when you doubt everything? You forget the worlds you have come from. So I am 100% sure there were times Rene Descartes who was alone with himself where his palm was on his forehead, and in some sense he did not know where the attention should go. It's honestly a kind of turbulence the pilot of consciousness may experience. It's how much freedom you give yourself to experience new image. That means, do you want a new idea, or do you want an old idea recycled? You see, there's a value to a new pattern in regards to what it brings. So when I became more sensitive that I'm not just living my whole day as a body howling a projector of a projection of a mind around, even though it appears to be on like I'm saying my approach is not of negation, even though I'm conscious of duality, but I'm how can I tell you? It's like geometry can can become limitless. The rebellion against the incomprehensible landscape. It's a strange love story, you know. It's a love story between the known and the unknown, between what the person is, what the self is, and what kind of world the self is in, and in regards to what the kind of world the world will be, and what kind of self the self will be. And that's the kind of romance, the romance with the action of the day, you know. Pretty much we are not designed to be we're not designed for joy. If we were designed for joy, we would not be able to interpret hardship. So it's very obvious human beings were not made to just it's like, even I'm not even suggesting like a sort of creator dynamic. I'm just saying that the human design that we see, it has a total potential to be chaotic. It has a total potential to be ordered, and before it is chaotic or ordered, it has to notice both in accordance to a relationship. That means no person is ever lost, because your sense of loss is taking you back home. I don't know how to say this, but it's like it's a reaction off the polar opposites of how man has put a psychological framework to the moment. Let me tell you how temporary language is. I'm telling you now. It's just I'm telling you in silence. Do you know how many times I've opened my eyes, from the void? It's ridiculous. And it's even more ridiculous, more preposterous to say we are a thought. Like, I understand we need to talk, communicate, but we are more than the terminal of our speech. We are more than the symbols that our sounds reflect. It's like we are, Terence McKenna said, it's like a sophisticated ape making mouth noises. That's speech, guys, right now. Like I could wear the greatest suit and tie, but I'm a creature just making mouth noises, you know? It's just that the mind comes in when these sounds are not just sounds anymore, they evoke images. We are, we have to somehow re-steer technology's attention to our blind spots. That means we should release technology in kind of space. Like, you know how people practice, for example, like they put they test a bomb like in an empty wasteland. You know, similarly, I feel technology should, maybe there should come this extreme law to halt everything and to only continue AI once we have become interstellar. Once we have, pretty much, I'm saying the whole tech industry should think about going on Mars so that they can test the technology's advance, success, or failure on a different space. You know, it's like you either solve the problem or you take the problem somewhere where it can be solved easier. Anyways, that was a incredible tangent. The momentum of the inner stories, that's very important. That means waking up every day and trying to finish writing this novel that is your future, and constantly remembering one outcome. It's very strange. It's as if the world, the logos will not whisper in the ear of the man who only sees himself. It has never been like this. You cannot experience the livelihood of the planet if you don't see that livelihood in yourself. Like, I honestly, when I was younger in class, I would look at like all these teachers in school and I'm like, what are these guys doing, wasting their lives, you know? You know, I was a firm believer of like those who can't teach. But then I realized the way reality is designed is there will come a point in every person's life where they can't do some things. So I notice it's like it's all about where you're taking the problem solving attention of future generations. And if we can fix that problem, everything will be easier. The child is getting shocked. You know, it's like, let me tell you what this transition is. This is the problem I find the West has in its educational system. Its educational system, it's for the first time cultural values have become more important than academic values. When cultural values are more important, that means it's like the child is wondering about knowledge and is wondering about, for example, economical survival. And when it has to wonder between these two, it has to be like, it's like, if knowledge cannot ensure economical survival, fuck knowledge. I'm going to go figure out something I can do now. Do you see what I mean? Excuse my language, I shouldn't be cursing, but it's like, it's of that intensity, you know, where the person has to choose where their energetic being and attention goes. That's a very fascinating thing. Just the notion of a multidimensional self can suggest a multidimensional mind. And if there are various minds making location, so check this idea out. The multiverse theory, there's one view of seeing it that, all right, in one parallel reality you're combing your hair left, in one parallel reality you're combing your hair right, you know. And there's endless parallel realities of you doing different stuff, or the moment being different. Let me tell you, the multiverse, this sort of parallel reality kind of theorization, it's kind of hilarious. Let me tell you why. Because it is the same, it's literally like no attempt has been made, only potential has been seen. No attempt of conceptual thinking has been made, only potential has been seen. That means the person just wonders what if, and they think, all right, parallel realities. Just that what if gives the permission for the imagination to create whatever it likes. But there is this notion that if we are not bodies, so think of it this way: right now the physical component of your moment of being is taking responsibility for the objective component of your being, for the subjective component, for your thoughts and whatnot. You're saying like you are having thoughts, like isn't that how we speak, you know? We say people are running around this planet to find their minds, and some have lost their minds, and some are creating a lost and found for mine. But what I'm suggesting is simply that if the mind is projecting the world, and the mind is a multidimensional phenomena, this means that it's like one mind. It's like one soul, endless bodies. Oh my God, I'm messing this up. One, one consciousness, um, endless minds that project ad infinitum bodies. We're kind of like, I find this is the most strangest metaphor, you know. But we literally, human existence for consciousness is like the back of an engine of a uh, where the flames of a rocket ship, those old school rocket ships, like you know. I should probably look up the terms for this, but we are burning fuel for the moment. We are like the bottom of a rocket in which that burst of intensity is the whole animated factor. It's as if we are burning to be alive. Maybe I should use better words. We are dying to be alive. I don't know if that's better, but what I mean is like something is leaving the moment throughout the day, and something is coming. And if your attention is just on what leaves, life becomes a dull place. If you suddenly see that the honest life brings with it honest findings, that means it's like the whole issue is not imagination and reality. It's that you don't trust what you see. That's the issue. And that side is you have to listen to your life. You have to listen to uh, how the winds of evolution move language in your mind throughout the day. I was thinking about kind of future social developments, like how society can become updated. And I kind of noticed, like, just like how patterns repeat in history, maybe that Venetian masquerade kind of thing may come back. Like it has kind of become a digital masquerade, you know. People can control how they are seen rather than being comfortable how they are seen. So as we evolve, as the civilization becomes more advanced, well, guess what? There's going to be more able archetypes. Man is going to become the god of his dreams. He's going to awaken to the god of his dreams. He's going to uh, realize the limits were not the limits. It's kind of like nature creating art with every breath. That's what it is, you know. If it's like, if people were to kind of corner me to some sort of explanation of what's going on, I'll be like, nature is drawing art, and some parts of this artwork are conscious of themselves. They're conscious of the color. They are not just the color of the part in existence they have. You see, if you walk alone, of course, you'll enjoy your victories alone. But they will not feel like victories when you are in a different room than the world. It's kind of like we have to step out of our conditioning, like we're in a room and the party is happening next door, but we can't find that room to the party, you know? So we have to kind of like let go of an efficient reality for a more efficient one. The issue with materialism, I find, is that it's choosing to see the same context. It's like you make the world so lifeless that it's become an empty page. So, of course, from an empty page, anything is possible. There's even arguments that can be made. I kind of thought about this. The person lives on this planet temporarily. What does that mean? That means literally we're tourists on this planet. If we continue, there's something more. If we entertain that there's something more, we're like tourists on this planet. Okay? And the tour guide is like civilization. But the tour guide, unfortunately, is a machine. It doesn't evolve. It's not aware of the tourists. Imagine a tour guide who has no idea who the tourists are, you know? I remember, like, I went to Russia. There was this tour guide. This was me and my family when I was very young. I think I was like maybe 13. Like, my family went to Russia, and I remember we're all sitting in this. We go to what is it? Moscow, the Red Square, and then the tour guide starts saying, it was like this amateur dude who was like, red square actually means rose, and rose is red and beautiful, and this is why this is called as a beautiful kind of square. And people were like, yo man, maybe it's called the red square because of all the blood that was shed here. You know, it's like, you know. That tour guide was not, I think, was didn't even have access to Wikipedia knowledge, but maybe that's how the moment should have played out. I even remember being like 13 and going and seeing like Lenin in his what do you call it, in his sanctuary, kind of there, his mummified body. You know, it was open then for tourists to go, but pretty much it's like there's many veils of thought. It's kind of like an onion style sort of multidimensionality where you're going through the various layers, the various ways that in every environment language is evoked. Sometimes it's like when you want to understand cultural behavior or at least observe it, it's literally how the movement begins. I find it should be like this. The Western cultures should that focus on freedom should teach about emotional intelligence to Eastern cultures. Eastern cultures should teach Western cultures about discipline. And this balance of freedom and discipline is going to be kind of like the yin yang engine of our civilization, you know. All right, guys, I'm kind of my attention is going to come to the chat, so let's see what's up. Welcome, Idris. Welcome, Just the Dawn. Anyone else who wants to jump in, feel free. So, Idris, you say, can people get hypnotized by their own thoughts? Yeah, man. I call that language worship. and making them unaware of their reality, or thoughts at least initially are needed. Yeah, they are needed. You need the illusion to figure out there's the truth. Sometimes I think repeat thoughts are simply photocopies of the first one. Then I know it is an illusion of thinking when. Okay, this is a crazy thing. So guys, has anyone here listening to this talk right now? Feel free to share in the comment section. Have you ever emotionally, has your intelligence just purely moved emotionally without turning into thought? That means, has anybody thought through, like thinking through emotions? It's like emotions are moving first, then thoughts arise. Sometimes emotions don't have image, they're just vibes, you know? Vibes that are evoked in accordance to kind of what memory the attention goes. So my question is, there is a way that thoughts can arise that can totally be non-linear. Imagine, like right now, me and you are speaking in a certain way. We can have totally some person appear out of nowhere who is speaking in ways, is using the same words in ways me and you have never heard. Do you know? So I'm saying it's like, I feel there is, again, we have to acknowledge the unknown. If we don't acknowledge the unknown, the thought is the only room we're standing in, I find. Okay, that's interesting, Idris. If you want to elaborate a bit more. What do you mean by emotion is unibody? Oh, that means they're the unconscious? They're movements of the unconscious? Like the collective unconscious? What do you mean? Okay, let me. I find emotion is just an intensity of energy before it's directed somewhere. Okay, Idris, I agree. Strangely, I agree. There was a time I thought there was like an electromagnetic explanation to emotion. Hmm. Hey Jacob, welcome to the talk, man. The day's been good, bro. To be honest, I don't know. Let's see, Jacob. What do you think? What do you think moves emotions? Nice. So Jacob, I was reading your comment. Yeah, it's believe it or not, I think it becomes like the chicken and the egg kind of situation, but for the body and mind. And so, really, how much do you feel you are a shape, a subjective shape, a subtle shape? Like the same way I can visualize the cop, like imagine like I visualize this computer in front of me, like a duplicate version of it hovering in the air, the same in the same space I imagine that, I also imagine myself. Hmm. Guys, just hold on for a minute. I'll be back. I need to do something. I'll be back. Okay. Okay, nice. So I think Jacob and Idris, you guys are saying the same thing. Now, I think in order to live as a person, we need a story. In order to be a character in a story, we need to be sensitive to various environments. Because we need to be very sensitive to various environments, we have different emotions and different images of each environment we have been. And so it's kind of like Imagine the person goes and sits in like a yogic Himalayan kind of cave and becomes still and silent for a long time, and eventually is in a moment in an atmosphere behind their eyes where they can be any thought, right? So the Buddha kind of even experienced that. He says he reached a point where there were these dark arrows being thrown at him and he turned them into lotus flowers. So he reached a point where he realized the freedom behind his eyes is evocational, you know? So that's what I'm saying. It's non-linear. So that's my perspective. That means like we can attempt to somehow carve it in language, but it's I think it's much harder. I think it becomes more dynamic and integrative, and at times it feels like waves to me. Waves of data hitting me. Like I don't know how to say it. It's like something is changing, but it's changing based on a movement of something else. All right, guys. I have this feeling that I need to end the talk right now, but I wanted to say that I should probably make a Facebook group. you know. But anyways, when inner storylines match external experiences, the attention moves beyond patterns. I find you have to trust life in order for it to advance. When you don't trust it, you don't even feel like you want to do anything there. So that trust factor is the most crucial thing. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And the chat is gonna still be open, so and you guys can still converse. It's just I gotta head out. So take care, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.